It was a cold, quiet night when everything changed. The kind of night where the world feels still, but beneath the surface, life is about to take an unexpected turn. Our family had always seemed normal, or so I thought. I never imagined that an innocent dinner conversation could lead us down a path that none of us were prepared for. It all started when my stepmom, Lisa, set her plate down with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She always had a way of masking her emotions, but tonight, there was something different. Dad noticed it too. He glanced at her, but said nothing. Across the table, my stepbrother Ethan was unusually quiet, poking at his food like it might bite him. The tension in the air was thick, but no one dared to break the silence. Then, out of nowhere, Lisa leaned forward and said something that made my stomach drop. What if we tried something different? Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as if she'd rehearsed this line 100 times. Dad furrowed his brow, his fork paused midair. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone cautious. She hesitated, glancing at Ethan and then at me. "I've been thinking," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it would be better for everyone if we made a change, just for a little while." Ethan and I exchanged nervous glances. What kind of change was she talking about? And why did it feel like we were the subject of this unspoken plan? Lisa's eyes softened as she explained. "You've always been so different from each other, but maybe it's because you haven't had the chance to step into each other's shoes." Dad's face darkened, and he shook his head slightly. "Lisa, I don't think—" But she cut him off gently. "Just for one night," she said, her gaze shifting between us. "One night to see the world through each other's eyes." My heart raced as the words sank in. What exactly did she mean by trading? And why did it feel like this was about more than just a simple experiment? Before anyone could answer, the sound of a distant thunderclap echoed outside, punctuating the unease that now filled the room. This wasn't just another family dinner. It was the beginning of a night we would never forget. The room fell silent after Lisa's words. You could almost hear the unspoken questions swirling in the air. Ethan and I sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh it off or take her seriously. Dad's expression was a mixture of concern and disbelief, and for once, he seemed at a loss for words. Lisa, however, didn't back down. Her calm demeanor was unnerving. "I know it sounds unusual," she continued, her voice steady, "but sometimes stepping outside of your comfort zone can teach you things you'd never realize otherwise." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Are you saying we'd swap places? Like, what? Pretend to be each other?" Lisa nodded slightly, a small smile playing on her lips. "Exactly. You both live under the same roof, but it's like you're in two completely different worlds. Maybe if you walked in each other's shoes, even just for a night, you'd understand each other better." I couldn't help but glance at Ethan again. We were about as different as night and day. He was quiet, reserved, always with his nose buried in a book or tinkering with some project in his room. I, on the other hand, was the loud one, the one who liked to push boundaries and test limits. We didn't fight exactly, but we didn't click either. Dad finally spoke, his tone wary. "Lisa, I'm not sure this is a good idea. They're kids, not some social experiment." Lisa sighed, her gaze softening as she turned to him. "I'm not trying to experiment, Mark. I just want them to see the world differently. We're a family, and families should understand each other." The word family hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was a reminder that we weren't a traditional family, not by a long shot. Lisa had come into our lives just a few years ago, and while she tried hard to bond with us, there were always unspoken walls between us. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Okay, he said quietly, surprising everyone. I'll do it, just for one night. All eyes turned to me. My instinct was to say no, to push back against this strange idea, but something in Ethan's expression stopped me. He looked determined, like he wanted to prove something. And maybe, deep down, so did I. Fine, I muttered, crossing my arms. But if this gets weird, I'm out. Lisa smiled, her eyes lighting up with a mix of relief and something else I couldn't quite place. The deal was set, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this one night was going to change more than any of us expected. Later that night, Lisa knocked softly on my door. Her voice was gentle but firm when she spoke. Can I come in? I hesitated before muttering, Sure. She stepped inside, her presence filling the small room in a way that made me uneasy. Lisa wasn't one for casual conversations, and tonight felt no different. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I know this feels strange, she began, her tone laced with a mix of sympathy and determination. But trust me, there's a reason I'm doing this. I looked at her, trying to read her expression. What reason? You keep talking about family and understanding, but this feels off. What aren't you telling us? Lisa's eyes flickered, just for a moment, as though she was weighing how much to say. Sometimes, she said carefully, we don't realize how much someone else is struggling until we step into their world. Ethan and you're both carrying things I don't think the other one sees. This isn't about playing a game. It's about facing the truth. Her words hit harder than I expected, but before I could respond, she stood and left, leaving me with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, Ethan was in his room, pacing. I could imagine the way his mind was probably racing, dissecting every detail of what was about to happen. That's how Ethan dealt with things. He overthought, overanalyzed. I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were restless, full of strange images and fragmented conversations. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with anticipation. Lisa was already up, bustling around the kitchen like it was a normal day, but the tension in her movements betrayed her calm facade. Dad was unusually quiet, sipping his coffee with a faraway look in his eyes. Ethan and I exchanged wary glances, but said nothing. The silence between us wasn't new, but today it felt heavier, like there was something unspoken hanging over us. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. It starts tonight, she said simply, setting plates on the table. After dinner. Neither of us responded, but the unease in the room was palpable. Whatever this night had in store for us, it felt like there was no turning back now. The day dragged on like time itself was holding its breath. Ethan and I avoided each other as much as possible, both pretending the night ahead wasn't looming over us. Lisa seemed unusually cheerful, humming to herself as she went about her day, but it only added to the unsettling feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. Dad, on the other hand, looked like he was biting back words he wanted to say, but couldn't bring himself to. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the house, Lisa called us to the living room. The room felt colder than usual, even though the heater hummed softly in the background. Ethan and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, while Lisa and Dad stood nearby, their expressions unreadable. Lisa handed us each a small notebook and a pen. You'll both keep track of what you experienced tonight, she said. Write down everything, your thoughts, your feelings, anything that stands out. This isn't just about swapping roles, it's about understanding. I glanced at Ethan, who looked as skeptical as I felt, but neither of us argued. Lisa handed Ethan a plain hoodie of mine and tossed me one of his worn-out sweaters. If you're going to step into each other's lives, you might as well look the part, she said with a faint smile. The weight of the sweater felt heavier than it should, like I was already sinking into Ethan's world. When I slipped it on, it smelled faintly of old books and something I couldn't quite place, something familiar yet foreign. Ethan pulled my hoodie over his head, looking just as uncomfortable. Lisa's voice softened. Remember, this isn't just about playing pretend. It's about seeing the world through each other's eyes, even if just for one night. Be honest with yourselves and with each other. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us spoke. The weight of her words hung between us, thick with unspoken tension. As the clock struck 8, Lisa clapped her hands gently, signaling it was time. All right, you two, let's start. Ethan, you'll spend the evening in Liam's space, his room, his routines. And Liam, you'll do the same with Ethan's. Ethan hesitated, but eventually stood and walked toward my room. I followed him halfway before veering toward his. My footsteps felt heavy as I approached his door, a place I'd rarely been. When I stepped inside, it was like entering a different world. Ethan's room was a stark contrast to mine, neat, quiet, and filled with things that felt entirely foreign to me. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with thick novels, old journals, and stacks of paper. A desk by the window was meticulously organized, with pens, notebooks, and a small lamp casting a dim, warm glow. I sank onto his bed, feeling out of place. Everything here screamed Ethan, calm, methodical, and guarded. As I picked up one of the journals from his desk, curiosity got the better of me. Flipping through the pages, I was startled to see sketches, notes, and even letters he'd written to himself. One page caught my eye, a drawing of our family. It wasn't perfect, but it was raw and real. Underneath the sketch, he'd written, "What if I don't belong?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never thought about how Ethan might feel in this family, about what he might be hiding behind his quiet demeanor. Meanwhile, Ethan was in my room, sitting on my unmade bed and staring at the mess around him. My posters, my sneakers kicked into the corner, the chaos of my desk. It was all so different from what he was used to. He noticed my open journal lying on the desk. Flipping through it, he found scribbles of my frustrations, my insecurities, and a page where I'd written, "Why does no one understand me?" The realization hit us both, though miles apart in separate rooms. This night was about more than trading spaces. It was about facing the parts of ourselves we'd buried deep, and the weight of that truth was just beginning to settle in. Ethan and I stayed in each other's spaces longer than I expected. At first, I thought I'd hate it, but as I sat in his room, surrounded by the quiet, I felt something I couldn't quite explain, like I was stepping into a version of Ethan's mind. The weight of that one phrase I'd read, "What if I don't belong?" lingered. It wasn't like Ethan to show vulnerability, but maybe that was the point. I wanted to shake it off, but then I noticed another notebook tucked under his bed. It wasn't like the others, polished and neatly kept. This one was different, worn, its pages filled with uneven writing and frantic sketches. I flipped through it, and my stomach churned as I realized what it was. The notebook wasn't just a collection of thoughts. It was a record of moments where Ethan felt invisible. Little things, conversations he wasn't part of, decisions that excluded him, and memories where he was overlooked. My name showed up more than once, and I felt a pang of guilt reading about times I hadn't even noticed he'd needed someone. In my room, Ethan was having his own revelations. He'd found my journal, but it wasn't just the words that struck him. It was a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages, an old letter I'd written to Mom years ago, never sent. The letter poured out everything I'd been holding in, how I missed her, how I didn't know how to handle a new family, and how I felt like I was failing to live up to everyone's expectations. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. It dawned on him that while he'd been feeling out of place, I wasn't as confident or as sure of myself as I seemed. Maybe we weren't so different after all. Just as we were both processing these discoveries, Lisa knocked on Ethan's door. Or my door now. Her voice was calm, but there was something in her tone that made my chest tighten. Liam, we need to talk. I opened the door, and the look on her face confirmed my unease. She led me to the living room, where Dad was already waiting, his expression unreadable. Ethan came in moments later, looking just as confused as I felt. Lisa took a deep breath. I wasn't completely honest about why I wanted you to do this. She hesitated, glancing at Dad before continuing. There's something you need to know, and I couldn't find another way to help you understand. Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ready to break. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, the unease between us now amplified. You both have been holding on to so much, Lisa said, her voice soft but steady. But tonight isn't just about seeing each other's lives. It's about seeing the truth about this family, what it was and what it could be. Before either of us could ask what she meant, Dad stood up, his face pale. Lisa, are you sure they're ready for this? The room went silent, and I felt the weight of whatever was coming pressing down on me. Whatever truth they were about to share, I knew it was going to change everything. Lisa looked between us, her eyes filled with a strange mix of guilt and determination. You've both felt like you didn't belong here, she began, her voice trembling slightly. And part of that is my fault. There's something I haven't told you, something I've been scared to say, because I didn't know how it would affect this family. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, the unease between us growing. Dad shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck as if he wanted to step in but couldn't find the words. Lisa took a deep breath. Ethan, you and Liam aren't just stepbrothers. You're half-brothers. The words hit like a thunderclap, and for a moment the room felt like it had frozen in time. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to laugh and say it was a joke. But the look in her eyes told me it wasn't. What? Ethan finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa nodded, her eyes welling up. It was before I met your father, Liam. I had a relationship, and Ethan is the result of that. I didn't know how to tell either of you, and when I married your dad, we agreed to let the past stay buried. Dad stepped forward, his voice low and filled with regret. It was never about keeping secrets to hurt you. We just wanted to give you both a fresh start, to build something new together as a family. But looking back, we see how wrong that was. Ethan's face was a mix of shock and anger. So all this time, we've been brothers, and no one thought to tell us? I didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, betrayal. A part of me wanted to yell, to demand answers. But then the realization hit me. Ethan's struggles, his feelings of not belonging, mirrored my own because we were cut from the same cloth. Before I could say anything, Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. I hesitated but followed him. Outside, the cool night air stung my face. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, his back to me. I don't even know who I am anymore, he said quietly. You're my brother, I replied, the words surprising even me. And as strange as it also felt right. Ethan turned to face me, his expression softening. Maybe this changes everything, or maybe it doesn't. I just don't know. Maybe we figure it out together, I said. And for the first time, it felt like we were finally on the same page, starting a new chapter we never saw coming. Ethan and I stood there in the quiet of the night, the cool breeze carrying with it a sense of fragile calm. For the first time, I felt like the invisible wall that had always stood between us was beginning to crumble. We didn't need to say much more. Sometimes words only get in the way. When we finally went back inside, Lisa and Dad were still in the living room, their faces marked with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Lisa looked up, her eyes searching ours for a sign, maybe for forgiveness or understanding. Ethan spoke first, his voice steady but soft. "You should have told us sooner. I don't know how to process this yet, but I think I get why you waited. It doesn't make it right, but I get it." Lisa nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose the family we'd built. But I see now that by keeping the truth from you, I created a bigger gap between us." I stepped in, surprising even myself with how calm I felt. "We can't change the past, but maybe we can try to move forward. Together." Ethan glanced at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Maybe trust, maybe relief. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Together." The next few days were strange. There were a lot of moments where things felt awkward, like we were all walking on eggshells, trying to figure out what this new version of our family meant. But gradually, the tension started to lift. Ethan and I talked more, not just about the past, but about the things we'd never shared before. I learned about his love for sketching and how it helped him process his emotions. He found out that my confident exterior was often a cover for my own fears. Lisa and Dad gave us the space we needed, but they were there too, more open and honest than they'd ever been. It was as if the weight of the secret they'd been carrying had lifted, and for the first time, we could all breathe. One evening, Ethan handed me a sketch he'd been working on. It was a picture of our family, imperfect, messy, but together. At the bottom, he'd written, "Belonging isn't about being the same. It's about showing up." I smiled and looked at him. "This is us now," I said, and for the first time, it felt like it really was. Maybe we weren't perfect, but we didn't have to be. We were family, and that was enough.